Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the Therapy Matters podcast, your one-stop resource and expert insights and advice on everything therapy rehab. I'm your host, Scott Rongo, and today I'm joined by Troy Bage, CEO of Ivy Rehab for Kids. Troy, thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Hey, great, Scott. It's good to be on here and excited to spend a little time talking about our journey at Ivy Rehab for Kids and sharing a little bit about some of our learnings and where we've come from. So great to be on with you.
Yeah, no, that's great, and we appreciate it. Probably the best place to start, right, is maybe a little bit of background on Ivy Rehab for Kids and how it started up.
Oh, sure. It's an interesting story. Ivy Rehab for Kids is part of a larger organization, Ivy Rehab. I served for the last 5.5 years as the chief operating officer for Ivy Rehab. And we had initially a single pediatric therapy clinic in Cranford, New Jersey since about 2015 that came on as part of an acquisition we had done. That single site continued on. We partnered with another group down in Virginia that brought on an additional 6 sites. And what we found as we dug into pediatric therapy is we loved it. We love the heart of what it serves, the population that it serves. We also found that although it's a challenging business, it's one that we found a way to be able to make it a good business and something that we could grow. So you fast forward in 2022, we made this strategic decision to really commit all into pediatric therapy. And so we had phenomenal growth last year, and we sit today at about 118 sites across 11 different states, far and away the largest pediatric therapy provider in the country.
That's awesome. I think there's always something great to be said about businesses, and you can say this about therapy across the board, but just businesses in general where you're doing good for people, but also obviously able to make it economically make sense for the investors and for people involved, right? So it's a win-win across the board. So when you think about it, as you expanded the business, what are 2 or 3 things that you learned that you'd say these would be tips and tricks, if you will, for our listeners that might be looking to do something similar in nature?
Sure. Well, maybe I'll give you a first, maybe broader learning. It's that pediatric therapy is a tough business with a big heart. And the reason I say that is you think about a business model is that you've got your primary payer in pediatric therapy is usually Medicaid. So think low reimbursement. And your therapist population, everything you do with the kids is one-on-one care. So think lower productivity. So low reimbursement, low productivity. You say, boy, let's do more of that. It's not the easiest from a business standpoint, but we found a way that we're able to really marry the great parts about pediatric therapy, the incredible need that's out there for children who need high quality services like we provide. And we've been able to build what we think is a really special business. And then the support systems around that business, around clinical education, around teammate development, around professional growth that we think puts us in a different place than really anybody else who does this service line across the country. So we feel great about that. If we step back and we think about some of the learnings, the first one, and you start with the biggest one first, it's culture is king. And the culture, I think as most people know, really defines who your business is and what it feels like. And for Ivy Rehab for Kids, a lot of our growth has been through bringing on new partners, so acquisitions, but for us, they're partners. They come in, they have their own culture of their sites, and we've got to find this balance of being able to allow them to continue to have a great culture that was something we wanted to partner up with, while also bringing them a little bit of Ivy's culture that we think is pretty special also. So I think that's a big challenge in making sure that whenever you're thinking about bringing on either opening up new clinics or bringing in acquisitions, you've got to really think first, is it a cultural fit? Do you see a pathway where you all will fit together culturally? And then making consistent investments in valuing what that partner brings to the table. Because I think when I say everything I learned about M&A, I learned from prior failures and watching it not go well. And probably, 20 years back in my career, I was part of a company that their M&A strategy was, we're going to acquire you and we're going to make you better and we're going to make you like us because we're way better than you are. That's why we're acquiring you. And I learned that that's, if you want to build a culture and you want to build a place where people feel included and part of the solution and part of the future, that you can't do that. And so we strive to do that. We're imperfect, certainly, but we're getting it right a lot. And we're pretty proud that we went through a recapitalization of the business earlier in 22. Nearly all of our partners stayed on and said they wanted to continue forward with us. And that was a real point of pride for the team at Ivy, because I think when you look at the overall therapy landscape as a whole, that's not what you've seen at those junctures and with many other companies. So we feel great about that. So that's one of the learnings is culture is king, and you've got to make sure that you're really investing that and valuing the culture of any groups that you're bringing on, and that you're infusing that across the company. The second I'd say is understand the key drivers of your business. And look, you can take a metrics dashboard and it can have, 50 different items, 30 different items, but there's probably a handful that really drive the economic engine of the business. And you've got to get ultra clear on what that is and how you're going to make sure that you balance those key economic drivers with the quality and service that you want to be able to provide in your community. And what's interesting is when you look at economic drivers and you say sometimes some people think of them as in contrast to clinical drivers. What we've found is that the most productive clinicians tend to also get the best clinical outcomes. They have the better quality scores. They have the better arrival rates. So it's not an inverse proportion of higher productivity, lower quality. Certainly, there's limits to that. But what we found is the more productive therapists produce better quality outcomes, better engagement from their patients, and ultimately that's repeat business, that's word of mouth, and that's how you really grow a business and be able to expand and grow your same stores over time. So you understand those key drivers and the metrics, and then you really make sure you have the right training and education to help your directors and your leaders be able to grow. And I think when I think about this idea of KPIs, you've got to be able to put it in real simple terms so your clinicians understand how to grab a hold of it and how to apply it to what they do. Because it's really easy to say units per visit is something we should improve. Well, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. Let's understand what a care session looks like. What we value, whether it's hands-on care, whether that's functional training, whether that's other activities that we do, and let's ensure that our coding and our documentation includes that. And so it's breaking it down to points, because most of us, and I'm a physical therapist by background. I've been one for coming up on 30 years. So getting close to that 30-year mark at this point. But one of the things I've learned is we don't get a whole lot of business training in school. And we ask our directors and our leaders, who vast majority are clinicians, to be able to, run a business, so to speak. And we've got to be able to provide them the tools and the resources and support to be able to do that effectively.
And I would guess, just on those first two topics, right? Like the dynamic of, you know, um, your culture and bringing on clinicians that are matching the culture, but with the dynamic of, driving results, right, on behalf of the patients. Those two things go hand in hand. I would suspect.
They do, and we use a word. It's an important one. It's intentionality, because just saying you've got great clinicians, you've got great patients, so that'll mean everything will run great. I wish it were that easy.
Right.
Although, if that were the case, then everybody would be, running pediatric therapy clinics. The reality is there's an intentionality that goes in how you create those interactions, how you measure the items behind that. So, we measure things like, parent education sessions so that we make sure we're doing things that engage the parents and the families because ultimately that's going to lead to better care for the kids that we treat in the clinics. And so I think it's sometimes easy to say and hard to do. And it's the people who make those commitments to doing it are the ones that I think wind up winning out in the end.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Makes sense. And you were about to, I think, reference a third one before I interjected there.
Sure. No, and this goes from is when you're small site to go into to two single site to go to two or three, or when you're larger and you go from 20 to 30, and it's building scalable processes. And it's where most businesses break, and we've watched a lot of single site practices that you're able to will it to happen because you're there every day in your own site every day, and they go to two or three or four sites, and it takes a totally different approach. And it takes systems, it takes processes, it takes consistency, it takes shared language that you use across the different sites because you can't will it at every site, every day. And again, some people are pretty good at it, but at some point in that scaling process, being able to will it to happen breaks, and you've got to be able to lean on processes and on the way you communicate with the team. And so one of the things that we've learned as we've grown is every process that we're looking at, we're saying, okay, is that scalable? Does that work when we add our next 10 or 20 clinics, or does that start to break down? And what happens, we started last year at 30 sites. There, I think it was 35 sites that we started last year at 22. And, we finished the year at just over 100 sites.
Wow.
And so a lot can break in going from, 35 to 100 if you're not constantly thinking of not what does this look like at 100, but what does it look like at 2 or 300 sites? And if we think about it that way, then listen, we're not going to get it right all the time, but we're getting a lot more of them right. And then when we find a process that isn't scaling, then we're able to reach back around and make the appropriate changes on that. And I think that's helped us do it in a quality way as we've grown.
Because pediatrics can be so different, right, than the adult space, how much of the processes were you able to take, right, from the adult business and replicate or use and leverage as you went to grow the pediatric business? Or were you really starting from scratch?
It's a great question, and honestly, the majority of the process is, pulled over, but majority might be 75%. So there is still quite a bit of build and quite a bit of customization to make sure we're getting it right. Because, look, in a typical outpatient therapy clinic, orthopedic therapy clinic, you have a physical therapist or a handful of physical therapists. In pediatric therapy clinics, you've got PTs, you've got OTs, you've got speech language pathologists. In many of our sites, we have behavioral technicians and board certified behavioral analysts doing ABA therapy with kids. The complexity goes up significantly. So, and each of those professions have their own nuances that make what they do really special. So it's important for us to be able to adjust our processes to each of the disciplines. And then you add in a bunch of disciplines. Well, now these disciplines have to interact with each other because many kids are getting two or three services while they're in our care. It's great for the parents. They get more of a one-stop shop process, but because they have to get that, you've got to create communication channels between therapists so that we make sure we're really rounding on the total care for the patient, not just each operating in a silo, so to speak.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. So I'm a sports guy, and you go into a game, right? And you can go in with the best laid plan, right? You did all your pre-work before you're going into a game, and then all of a sudden the defense throws something at you, good or bad, and you have to modify, right? You have to kind of adjust. So as you went and rolled, and as you were building up to these 100 clinics, there had to have been a surprise, right? There was something that got thrown at you that, whether it was, again, good or bad, but what would you say was the biggest surprise that you guys have had over the past few years?
Yeah, so I'll give you a good and maybe a challenge that we had. So the good one is, and listen, I'm a physical therapist. I've worked with therapists for a lot of years. Um, Pediatrics is just different. And so what I was surprised and really humbled by was the passion and commitment of our pediatric clinicians and really our front office team too. It's such a mission-based business and how much they care and how dedicated they are. And, we had teammates who were coming to us saying, we want to do hippotherapy, which is, a form of therapy on horseback and all the benefits that you get from that type of movement. And they came with the best built out plan and just this passion for why it was going to help. Wasn't necessarily the best business move, but it certainly was something that they really thought about and they found ways to make it work within our model. And that just it warms your heart when you see people that passionate about what they do and what they're willing to give and dedicate of themselves to make it happen for the kids and their families. It wasn't all joy. So I think one of the challenging pieces that we've seen, and I think it's many of us in this profession, and certainly across most professions, have experienced, is the changing needs of our workforce, and the challenges with the desire for more schedule flexibility, the desire for more workplace flexibility. Where you do your work now, that used to never be a question in therapy of, well, you do it in a clinic, of course, or you do home care, but now there's digital mediums that we're doing, and we continue to be deep in exploring how to do it better as we go forward. So I think that's led to a similar challenge that we've all have faced in across the country is turnover and making sure that we're providing an environment where people feel included, they feel special about what they're doing. They feel like they have a mission for why they're doing it. Listen, I think we're doing well with it, and we want to do better. We recently rolled out an initiative around workplace flexibility and schedule flexibility for our therapists that I think is going to continue to help them have options for how they create a work environment that's conducive for them individually while still being something that's right, provides the right access for the kids and right for the organization, because we all have to win together. And so we think we're navigating that, but I certainly would put that up as in 22 when you're growing really fast. Definitely one of the biggest challenges when you're getting a real changing workforce. And listen, through the pandemic, we saw a significant drop off in the number of clinicians. A lot of clinicians stopped practicing during that time, and by estimates, it's anywhere between 10 or 15% of the profession stopped practicing during that time. And so when you're seeing this high need for clinicians, that's a big driver of it. And so we're still in recovery, and but we think we're coming out of the other end in a positive way. 2022 or 23, I've talked with a lot of practices, both pediatric therapy and orthopedic, and this seems to be a comeback year. At least January, February will take 2 months as a trend. Is starting out better than maybe where we were in 22.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, to your point about the pandemic, what I find it's an issue of every business, right? And what I find interesting about it is it depends on the individual's stage of their life, right? Like somebody right at a school wants something very different than somebody, perhaps middle aged with children at home compared to somebody that's a empty nester, right? And so you throw that into the mix with what happened with the pandemic, and there's just like how do you solve that, right? How do you build a cohesive team? How do you make sure everybody feels involved, but yet people have different perspectives and thoughts on how that should look and feel, right? And their needs are different. So it's an interesting dynamic that I think every business is going to be challenged and have to work through, through the, I think the pandemic has changed that for the unforeseeable future for the most part.
Yeah, and you're seeing some interesting shifts in workforce overall. In essence, you're seeing more therapists coming out of school as new graduates saying, "How many hours do I need to work to be able to get benefits?" And so let's say that's 30. And so we talk about attrition from the profession, and we say, "Well, what's the attrition from going from 40 hours to 30. That's a 25% attrition in the
Hmm.
profession. We didn't lose anybody
Right.
from the
But
profession,
it
but
just,
that's 25% less hours
mhm.
that are being worked. So we call it functional attrition that we're seeing, and so we're navigating that. And I think one of the ways you navigate is you meet people where they are, and you find ways that allow them to have the level of work and functionality that they want to. And I think the digital side is extremely intriguing because people do want to work from home more than they ever wanted to before. And there's a real avenue, and you say, boy, can you actually do therapy from home? Listen, PT and OT, you can. It's hard, but speech therapy actually translates pretty well to the home setting, and so we've got a robust amount of work going in being able to virtualize some of what we do around speech therapy, speech language pathology, and it's going to provide access for more kids, but it's also going to provide environmental flexibility for our clinicians that allow them to be more of where they are, or many of what you see in particularly in all three professions, PT, OT, and speech, they're female dominated fields. And in OT and speech, it's probably north of 90% of female. So you see a certain amount of attrition that first 5 to 10 years as people start families. The digital piece might find a way to bring some of them back into the workforce on a part-time basis that they don't necessarily want to pick up and leave leave their home and spend 8 hours in a clinic, but they can see some patients from a distant space. So lots of neat opportunities, I think, for us to be able to continue to explore and hone as we go forward.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on it as well, but for your patients, right? Like just the ability for the parents to get their child, access to care that in a little bit of a simpler fashion as well. That might be more conducive than being able to get them to a clinic on a routine basis, right? So sounds like a win-win. So you guys have built a great business over the past 5 or so years, right? And I think if I think about it, it was during a pandemic as well. So, what's next, right? Like if you look at the last 5 years compared to the next 5 years of growth, what do you see having to do differently or more, much of the same? Obviously, the world's a little bit of a different place, a different stage. So, what are your thoughts there about the next phase of growth?
Yeah, we use an analogy from the Jim Collins book, Good to Great. Quite often, we talk about the flywheel, and you've got this giant cylinder that you're pushing, and it's going really slow. And I think what we saw in 2022 was we got that flywheel rolling, and we got it moving at a pace, and that was a big part of our growth accelerating. What's in the future for us? Look, we think there's a lot more communities that need our services. We think there's a big opportunity for us to continue to grow our ABA business. And so that's applied behavioral analysis business focused on children with autism. We have it in about 15 sites right now of our 100 plus, and we're going to have it on a lot more sites than that in the future because there's such a phenomenal interaction between ABA therapy and our pediatric, particularly OT and speech, but PTOT and speech. It's interesting because that hasn't been a model that's been overly successful in other areas. There's a lot of ABA companies, large ABA companies, that have brought on OT and speech language pathologists, and it's gone okay, but it hasn't been great. And it was interesting because we were talking to some ABA companies, and they said, "Oh yeah, our ancillary services." And I said, "What are your ancillary services?" "Oh, PTOT and speech." And that's the way they looked at it, and so it never integrated well into what they do. And we see ABA therapy and pediatric therapy as both core businesses for us that marry together really well. And our speech language pathologists, our OTs, they're teaching our BCBAs, and our BCBAs are teaching our PTs, OTs, and speech language pathologists, and we're getting better together every day. And the convenience that it provides for the parents is unbelievable. These are parents that have a lot going on in their lives, and they're trying to manage all the schedules of kids' appointments. And when they can come into one clinic and get all their therapy needs met, It's fantastic, and the reviews and the comments back from the parents is really special. So we see that. We think there's good continued growth for us. Our de novo or new site program continues to go well. We open most of our new sites with a partner in the clinic, a clinician who might not normally go out and go into a ton of debt to and take all the risk to open a practice, but in partnering with us, we do that together. And so we think this is our way of being able to help budding entrepreneurs be able to have success. And so it's been met incredibly well. And we think that's going to be a key part of our growth in the future. In addition to that, look, outcomes is a big talk in the industry. And right now in pediatric therapy, there's no prevailing outcomes measure. And so when you think about, one of the responsibilities of being, the largest and the leading company in the industry, we're going to work to be able to define what outcomes is for pediatric therapy, and working with a couple outside organizations to be able to get the right tools in place. And we expect by the end of 2023 to, at minimum, be piloting, if not having those being rolled out, and be able to show objectively the great work that we're doing, to payers, to the community and others, because we just think it's such a valuable service, and having the data behind you that says what you're doing is making a difference is really important. And so those are some areas we're going to be investing. So growth from a size standpoint, but also growth from infrastructure and support that we think will really help the community and certainly help the kiddos.
Yeah, and that's where I was just going to say, right, and ultimately having an impact on kids' lives, which is pretty awesome business to be in. So Troy, I think we're about out of time today, but I really want to share with you that I appreciate you joining the show. I think our listeners, I know I did, but I'm sure our listeners will also take a lot of nuggets out of the conversation today. Anything that you want to leave the folks with?
No, listen, thanks for the time. I appreciate being able to be on here, talk a little bit about Ivy Rehab for kids. I think we're doing something special, something with a big mission behind us, and I'm excited for what the future will bring. So thanks for the time, and glad to be able to get the message out.
Awesome. Thanks, Troy. Well, audience, thank you for tuning in to Therapy Matters Podcast, your one-stop resource for expert insights and advice on everything therapy and rehab. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Therapy Matters. Do you like the podcast? Give us a 5-star rating, subscribe, and tell all your friends about the show. Want to be a guest or know someone that would be a great guest speaker? Contact me at allison.jones@raintreeinc.com. That's allison.jones@raintreeinc.com. Therapy Matters is brought to you by Raintree, therapy and rehab's favorite EMR. Raintree is the only all-in-one therapy EMR delivering a complete and seamless end-to-end patient journey, from first contact to payment to patient retention. To learn more about Raintree, visit us online at raintreeinc.com.